Well, thank you very much indeed, Andre. It's a great honour to be given this spot in the first conference since 2019, in-person conference since 2019, and we're absolutely delighted at Chatham House to be able to host. I gather you went somewhere else in London before, but you are forgiven. So this is a great topic, absolutely great topic. And what I'm not going to do is I'm not going to do the long list, the shopping list, if you like, of all of our uncertainties in our world today. We could, obviously look at climate and conflicts and migration and all of the instabilities, and you'd all have your own set. You'll all disagree with me, and I will bore you to death. So I'm not going to do that. What I'm going to do instead is I'm going to offer perhaps a different way to think about our uncertain world. And I have to here confess that I trained as a nuclear structure physicist. That was my original PhD. I'm a quantum physicist, right? And that's how I think about our world. So I grew up with the concept, which you will have all heard of, but not all of you will probably have studied the mathematics of it, but don't worry, I'm not going there. I grew up with Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. And what you will know about that's all about measurement and the limits of measurement, right? And quite often people try and apply it in the social sciences, etc. Not a good idea. But what we do need to understand, it's not just about measurement. It is about the fundamental role that uncertainty plays in the workings of our universe. It's absolutely fundamental to our universe to have this uncertainty. It creates the space for it to happen. It's magic. And without this uncertainty that exists in our nature, we wouldn't be in the universe we're in now. Maybe some of you say, well, give me the other universe, please. But it's really important to understand this. So it's built into the very fabric of everything we do. And as my colleague Bernice Lee said yesterday, uncertainty is not new. Everything is about uncertainty. We've always had an uncertain future. For those who can predict the future, with crystal balls or, I don't know, wombats or whatever else they do, lobsters apparently, we all know that to be able to predict the future with any level of certainty is the work of charlatans. So nothing's changed there. This is our universe. But the limits of our uncertainty in our social sciences is now being greatly affected by the amount and the pace of change. And that change is technical change. And we can write, I'm sure many of us do, the history of humanity through the lens of technology. But this is having a massive social impact. And that social impact is also at a high pace of change. And this technology, not only is it very fast and is changing things, and that we're finding it hard in our societies to adapt to that pace of change. We're very good, by the way, individually at adapting to this technology. I mean, how many of us today will readily give up our smartphones in this room? How many times will you look at it even while I'm talking? We very quickly adapt ourselves personally, but our society finds it hard to adapt, partially, I think, because we find it hard to predict the impacts of these new technologies, the full range of impacts. And this technology is doing something else as well. It's connecting us in a way that we were not connected before. We've always been connected. That's no different. And you can see it in our DNA. You can see the swirl of humanity throughout the ages. We've always connected. We've always met. We've always exchanged ideas. We've always had children together from lots of different places in the world. We're all this wonderful big mix of connection. But this is now happening at a speed that we didn't have before. And that's been going on for a bit longer. The telephone was invented over a century ago. The the speed of travel, aeroplanes, etc., that also has been obviously growing enormously, but it's not that new. But this technology that's facilitated by this network of connection, the internet, overlaid by this World Wide Web so that we can all communicate together through the same protocols, that's new. And it's a great technology, and we love it, right? But, of course, there are some downsides to it that we perhaps didn't understand. And certainly, the inventors of this technology, the people who first began it, saw it entirely as a trusted technology. It was for a small network, a network of nuclear physicists, back in the 1970s. It was seen as something to facilitate that connection. And, of course, it's a great idea, so people wanted to adapt it and change it and spread it out and make it for the whole of humanity, which is what is happening. But of course, in it being a trusted network, it meant that security wasn't built in. So we've exposed people to all sorts of information that perhaps can be dangerous. We've exposed people to criminals in a way that they would not have been exposed before. We've exposed our deepest private knowledge, the information about ourselves, so that it can be available almost to anyone who wants it, if they have the technical ability to get it. And it's very easy to do that. So we are dealing with this technology that has so many upsides, but there are some major issues with it. And I would say that's true for all technologies. We're hearing today about the wonderful progress of genetics. We know about the amazing technologies that are allowing us to communicate through space, explore the universe, explore the seas. All of these technologies are amazing. We are seeing about the number of technologies that allow us to grow food in a different way. There will be other impacts that we haven't thought of yet. So what we're seeing here is what we call a complex adaptive network. So it's a highly interconnected network in a very complex system, but it's embedded in an unstable environment. And the network, the connectivity, interacts with the environment, which creates a much greater set of complexities. So we may be able to control things in our networks, we may be able to control things in the way that we do things, etc., but our environment is much harder to control. And the way in which the network is embedded in our environment means that we really have to understand the system as a whole. Now, we all know this, right? So how do we weave this into our work? And here I see that we can struggle to do that. How do we bring in this concept of complexity in an unstable environment into what we do, so that we can actually really portray the reality of what we're facing? And the good news is that we can do this. We can model complexity. We have the mathematics to do this now. And we can model it in a complex environment, a really difficult environment. And we can do things to understand, as a result, the way in which things might happen. Now, that's not to say that this is an oracle, but we can model decision-making, for example. We can model the potential, the full range of potential impacts, or a large range of potential impacts, I should say. In our modeling, we can do that for an event, or for a technology, or for a particular idea that we have. So we can create these models, and we've created one with Imperial College to model nuclear policy decision-making and try and understand the different pathways to making better decisions. We can create this model with the data that exists. It can be difficult because we can struggle with some data and really understand what it means. But we can play with the model, we can change the model, and we can understand then the range of pathways to different outcomes. And we can see a wider range of outcomes. And of course, as we all know, a small impact, a small event, can have a very large impact in this type of modeling. And a very large event can actually often result in no impact at all in this type of modeling. So we can also calibrate this model against history. We can create the conditions of a historical event in our model and check that at least one of the pathways will lead to what happened. We can check for the historic pathway. And that should give us some confidence in our model, not 100%. And so, as I say, it's not an oracle. It's not telling us what will happen. In fact, quite the reverse. It's telling us that there's a range of things that can happen, which we know, that's not new. But it's telling us maybe what that range might be that we might not have fully understood. But most importantly, I think for our work in think tanks, and this is my point, it allows us to illustrate this complexity. So that when we're talking to decision makers, government officials, heads of industry, etc., we can illustrate uncertainty. We can illustrate what this means, what the range of outcomes might mean, what might lead to them, and we can do it through showing the models, and if they like graphs and things, we can do it that way. But we can also do it with games. We can do it with online games, because that's actually what they are. All of those online games, I don't know how many people in the room play these online games, and some of them are, just online games for yourself, and some of them are massive games across the whole world, with playing with people in lots of different countries. And these things are actually complex models. They've got lots of decision-making pathways. You make decisions, it takes you somewhere else. There's a limit to it, of course. It's just a model, I keep on saying that. But it allows you to see all sorts of potential futures. And in playing these games, we can also create scenarios, which is what we do a lot here in Chatham House. I'm sure many of you do the same. And also full-blown what we call simulations, which are sort of real-time simulations of events, where we take decision makers through all sorts of weird quasi-real-time twists and turns in a crisis, for example. We can do that using these models and understanding the different pathways. Then, the really great thing is, a couple of things have come out of this. One is that we can understand where we might want to put our efforts when it comes to preparedness and resilience. We can see below the level of the surface of the range of potential impacts. We can see the different pathways, and we can start to see some pattern emerge, because that's one of the things that can happen with these models, and see the way in which we could perhaps try to reduce the worst possible pathways by building in preparation, building in resilience, perhaps building in some blocks. Of course, when you do that, you change the environment and you create different pathways, because it's an interactive system. And that is when we get to what we call nudging. So we've been working with what's called the nudge unit here, or the behavioral insights team, which was set up by the government many years ago, to look at how we might nudge the environment in our model. So you don't nudge the people. I think this is often a mistake that's made with the concept of nudging. People think about people being nudged, but it's actually the environment that you're changing in order to nudge the people in that direction. So it's a change in environment that you're trying to achieve with nudging. And it's quite difficult to do this because most of our nudging data comes from very large-scale models. Supermarkets. How do they get people to buy a particular thing? That's the sort of thing. How do we get people to go out and vote? That's the sort of large-scale nudging that we've seen. But there's an increasing body of knowledge and expertise on how we nudge in small-scale situations and how we nudge in policy world. And I think that this is showing all sorts of very interesting things, and we can feed all of those things back into our model and then see what might happen if we do this particular nudge, and whether that will create a whole set of unintended consequences, which often happens with nudges, or whether it might help create a push in the right direction, perhaps towards increasing stability. Okay, so we've got I'm going to talk about the challenges that we have. And I'm going to give us in this room 3 major challenges. So one of them is the obvious, is how do we communicate uncertainty and complexity, which is the twin of uncertainty, if you like. How do we communicate this to our target, our partners, our governments, our decision makers in industry, etc.? How do we communicate this and still retain the sense from them that we know what we're doing, right? We're not just going, oh, it's just such a mess. It's so uncertain. Who can possibly predict the future? So what we can do is show them the range of futures and show them how they might think about how they engage with that range of futures. We can show the worst of outcomes and what they might be able to do about reducing the probability of the worst of outcomes. And we can show them what we think would be the best of outcomes and how they could perhaps increase the probability of the best of outcomes. And what might happen if they do that, what might be the unintended consequences, etc. There might be some good ones as well, not just bad ones. So that's number one. I think we need to really think about that communication. And by the way, I don't suggest that you start talking about Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. I think that you'd lose them. The second challenge, I would say, and so this is a challenge to, I'm sure, nobody in this room, but perhaps some of your colleagues, is why is it that so many experts from think tanks talk with so much certainty? I mean, I watch people from other think tanks, never, of course, Chatham House. I've not got my fingers crossed at all. I watch them, for example, give evidence at parliamentary committees. I watch them on TV. I hear them respond to questions, and they respond with so much certainty. And they're often wrong. Of course they're often wrong. How could they be always right? But why so much certainty then? And is there any penalty for being wrong when you speak with so much certainty? At least internally. I mean, we perhaps don't want to expose that to the media necessarily and undermine ourselves, but if we don't deal with it internally, we're just going to, people talk behind your back about things like that, don't they? They don't talk about it to your face. They don't go, oh, you were wrong about that, weren't you? No, they go, it's completely wrong. They don't say it to your face. So let's start talking about that. Let's talk about uncertainty, and let's talk about the way in which we can communicate uncertainty with understanding and help our decision makers, because they don't deal with uncertainty well. And partly that's because they have to, in quantum physics, we say they have to perform the measurement, they have to make a decision. They have to collapse the wave function for all the physicists out there. And, it's oh no, I won't go to that. So they have to make a decision, and that decision might be wrong or right, and we can help them navigate that uncertain world, I think. So that's my first challenge. My second challenge is this. One of the key things in trying to think this through is diversity. And I'm delighted to see so many people from different parts of the world, but here's my challenge. How many people in this room are mathematicians? How many people in this room are musicians? We need more mathematicians, we need more musicians, particularly jazz musicians, where jazz exists in that uncertainty, right? We need people who think differently to us. We are full of IR and policy scientists, primarily, and we have a few others who've sort of strayed in there and spend the rest of the time faking it. And we need to bring in people with very different life experiences, people who can see the world differently, that can add in. And then when we do bring them in, it is not a tick box exercise. It is to listen and to understand the world from that perspective and factor that in, however uncomfortable it might be for us, into our own approach to complexity and uncertainty. I'm going to stop there, and I'm looking forward to any challenges you might have for me.